again by Benning. Darnell Nurse left it in the corner, gets up center. Perry scores! Corey Perry!
Lilia able to shake away from Solani. It's given away to Solani. Around in front. Score! Teemu Solani with the steal.
Perry in the face, 1-1. Score! Off the floor! On the board! Paul Kariya!
All right, what a day to delay the podcast, right?
Yeah, we lucked out there actually.
What a time to delay the podcast to the next day, because the Ducks make their biggest move of any kind, and not even just trades, just their biggest movement or news really of the entire season, moving Brandon Montour to the Buffalo Sabres for Brendan Gooley and a first-round pick. We'll get to that. But the whole purpose of us doing a show today anyway
originally
was to break down the Ducks versus Oilers game yesterday. We're not going to go too in-depth to it because I don't think anybody wants to go back and really talk about that. And, of course, most of the news today is about Brendan Montour. But there was a couple talking points we wanted to get to on that game before we moved into the big news of the day. And the first one was Sam Steele got called up from San Diego, and we speculated this, I think, 2 podcasts ago, because he had goals in 3 straight for San Diego. Ryan Getzlaf was a day-to-day with an upper body injury, or we assume it's day-to-day, so there was always a chance he might get called up, but he finally did, and he looked okay, but I think it's just a big surprise because, we heard when Randy Carlo got fired that, Bob Murray wants to keep Dallas Eakins down there so that the San Diego Gulls can be competitive, and that also included a lot of the young guys that we've seen this season. Then he starts by calling up Max Jones, follows that up with Troy Terry, and completes the trifecta by calling up Sam Steele. Are you a bit surprised that he's done this?
I'm more surprised that kind of given the last 2 games, obviously, the Ducks were kind of turning it around a little bit. And I think the last 2 games on Friday with Calgary and Edmonton last night, that was kind of the make or break what he was going to do. Prior to the Calgary game, I think they at one point were only 3 points back. I think at the start of that day they were 5 points out of the last wild card spot. So I think there was maybe even just a little bit of hope that this team's going to turn around enough to do it. And Calgary happened, Edmonton happened, and so now I'm a little confused why he still got those guys up there, because the time's kind of ticking for them to get sent back down to be eligible for the Calder Cup, the playoffs for the Gulls. So he's got to make some quick decisions here. I think they called up Sam Steele out of necessity. They tried to have Raquel play center in the Calgary game, and that didn't work out too red hot. They'd rather keep him on the wing, and they just needed another center. So Sam Steele's the hot hand. Give it a try in Edmonton. Like I said, I think these were the 2 games they were willing to try and give it a shot, a go at it, and they needed people. And Troy Terry and Max Jones have been everything you want. If they could score a little bit more, they've been everything that you want right now. Yeah,
they've looked good with Adam Henrique. But I think it is surprising too. I don't know the exact time that they have to be sent down to San Diego to be eligible. It might be midnight tomorrow. It might be by noon or whatever. I'm not exactly sure. But they're running out of time, like you said. But they're running into an awkward position, because if you want to send all 3 of them down, just so happens the Ducks also play Vancouver tomorrow. So you can't really just send 3 guys down, and that are all 3 of them were in the lineup last game. You would have to bring some guys up to make room for that, who you also want to be in San Diego to be able to be eligible for the playoffs. So the Ducks are in a weird spot right now where they need these guys up to play the game, and it could be as simple as a paper transaction after tomorrow's game if that is still within the deadline. If not, the Ducks are in a spot where they might just have to keep these guys up because some of the guys are out of the lineup. If Ryan Getzlaf isn't ready to go, obviously, we already know Andre Kasha is done for the season, and Patrick Eaves is still down in San Diego. So we might be at a situation where we wanted these guys to be down there for the playoff run for San Diego, and now they might get stuck just being a part of this Ducks team for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's not too terrible. I mean, at this point, I think Bummer is also kind of really trying to evaluate everything that he's got too. So I think he's kind of maybe changed his philosophy just a little bit, just to really kind of get an idea of who's going to be worth pursuing in the offseason, or who he thinks can make that jump the next season. But yeah, I mean, it kind of goes against what he had been doing So it's a little puzzling. Obviously, there's some times, and it's not like Bob Murray's, not one to wait till the last minute to move things around. He could bring Eves back. They still have Sprong kind of as a healthy scratch right now that could possibly be plugged in there. So I mean, there's some potential to move things around. But yeah, it would be interesting because it's the same thing. I don't know exactly when that deadline is. If it's midday on, a Monday, then he's going to have to try and make something happen pretty quick and have those guys holes filled, unless they're going to go ahead and just keep them up. So I don't know. We'll find out in less than 24 hours, I guess.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy day because we'll find out about that. We'll also have the Ducks game versus Vancouver tomorrow, and then we have the trade deadline, and you and me will be doing a live show for about probably a few hours tomorrow. We're still figuring out when we're going to go live. It's either going to be noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, or an hour after that, just to leave some time for the trickle effect that happens when the trade deadline closes, where some trades filter in, and usually the Ducks are a part of those trades that filter in after. And we also have this to give away tomorrow, which is now pretty ironic that we have this signed photo of Brandon Montour to give away on the stream tomorrow to one of our Twitch followers. So if you want to be entered for that, just give us a follow on Twitch. But it's kind of ironic.
It's limited edition now, so that's kind of cool.
Well, it's number 71, so it's as old news as you can get. So
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, but
we like to stay current here.
Exactly. So yeah, if you want that, give us a follow on Twitch. We will be giving away that on stream tomorrow. But it is on topic with Brandon Montour getting traded, and we might as well just get into that because I think that's why everybody is here anyway, is to talk about the Brandon Montour trade to Buffalo. I was on a bus back to Sudbury when this happened with like 5% battery, trying to get tweets out, trying to figure out what was happening. But it all started, I believe, with a tweet from Elliot Friedman, where he kind of Fried bombed it, if you want to go with a wash bomb, and just put in. I think the first thing he said was the Ducks and Sabres are working on a trade, and then just as the part of the course with trades, a couple seconds later, you got Pierre LeBrun and Bob McKenzie and everybody else getting in there. Revealing some minor details in each part of the trade. The first part was that Brandon Montour was the piece going back, and then it finally breaks that it's Brendan Gooley in a first, and at first we thought it was going to be the Sabres first, so it seemed like it was
so nice.
a big win at that point, because if the Sabres missing the playoffs, you get a chance at 2 picks in the top 15. But then it comes out that it's either the Sharks or the Blues pick, whatever one ends up being higher. So the highest pick the Ducks could possibly get is number 20. So that's the best case scenario, that the Ducks could get the 20th overall pick in this year's draft and Brendan Gooley. What are your thoughts on this trade? Because we knew eventually a piece was going to fall on this blue line. I kind of thought it was going to be closer to the draft, but I guess Bob Murray seemed to be happy with what he got in this deal.
Yeah, kind of feel bad. I mean, Montour really wasn't given much of a chance this season, as were most Ducks defensemen. Wasn't given a chance to really shine. He's looked goodish, I'll say, over the last couple of games. So I was interested to see, because this style is definitely more his style and Cam Fowler's style. But he kind of been relegated to the third line with Magna over third defensive line over the last little while. He kind of made a bad pinching play in the Calgary game that ended up kind of resulting in a 2-on-1 that resulted in the game-winning goal late in the third period.
Straw.
that was it. That's why I was just like, all right, that kid's got to get out of here. I don't care. It's fine. He's got a lot of offensive upside, and he's a good skater. He's a right-handed shot. So he's a valuable piece. I don't think the Ducks got fleeced in any sense. They do get a first-round pick. Their young draft pick is another good skater. He doesn't have quite the same offensive upside, at least so far, that they were expecting, but he should be an NHLer. He hasn't really gotten a chance in Buffalo, as Buffalo got that first draft pick last year in Dahlin, and instantly he fell down in the depth charts on that side, and he didn't have a real great preseason. So he's kind of, a lesser, younger version of Montour in a way. There's too crowded. He's not really getting the opportunity to shine. And that's kind of the same thing happening here with Montour. Even though he got a lot of minutes early on, he was kind of stuck a little bit, and it didn't look like they were ready to kind of move forward with him. Also, contract comes into play too. Montour's there. He's signed for another year, but then he's a restricted free agent. But at that point, if you go to the expansion draft and you re-sign Montour, now he's a guy that you'd probably want to try and have to protect. Whereas our new draft pick, that won't necessarily be the case. So there's some of that involved. You know, it could be positioning for that expansion draft as well. But that first round draft pick, man, that would have been great if it was Buffalo, because there's a damn good chance we're talking top 6, hopefully. I mean,
well,
it's
I'm
just
sure it would be lottery protected, but even then, it's still a pick that's likely outside the playoffs. It's not, you know, a 20 to 31 pick, right? So
yeah, Buffalo's kind of in the same standing point-wise on the East Coast. They're about 6 points out from Montreal for the last wild card spot. The Ducks are 8 points out of the last wild card spot. So these two teams aren't really, you know, gearing up necessarily for a playoff push. I think Buffalo wanted to kind of solidify their young defense, and that was a piece that they had. And they had 3 first-round draft picks. So you can get rid of one, keep your highest one, and that still looks good for them too. So I think it kind of worked all the way around. It didn't, you know, blow my skirt up on either side. Like I said, it depends what Montour ends up doing and how that first-round draft pick gets utilized to really kind of. So this is something we'll figure out down the road.
Yeah, for me,
who's really kind of won in it.
For me, it all depends on what Brendan Gurley turns out to be. If he turns out to be a top 4 defenseman, that can be exactly, not maybe to the same extent, but similar to what Brandon Montour brings to this team and impact, then you won because you get the extra first-round pick. And it doesn't really matter what that first-round pick turns into, because that's all on scouting, right? And that's luck to some extent. You can look back at the Ducks getting Raquel and Gibson in the draft picks from the Leafs, and the Leafs got Tyler Biggs, and say, oh, that was a win. But that's just good scouting on that part. So it really does come down to what Brendan Gurley ends up turning out to be for this team. If he's anywhere close to Montour, it's a win, because you get that first-round pick and chance at another very good player this year, which is exactly what the Ducks need. But you did bring up something interesting, and that's the Ducks now solidifying themselves on the back end for the expansion draft. They're now in a spot where they weren't going to lose somebody, which people thought they were before, and Brandon Montour and Josh Manson were the guys that were rumored to be one of them would be left exposed and you would lose them. It's a bit earlier than I thought it would happen, but now the Ducks, at least if they remain having these 3 guys for the expansion draft, in Lindholm, Fowler, and Manson, don't have to worry about losing somebody to Seattle when the time comes. And now the only odd man out at this point happens to be Adam Henrique, who possibly could still find his way out a different team come the deadline tomorrow, because he'd be the likely guy to get picked up at this point if he was left exposed. But yeah, it's an interesting one. And Brendan Gurley, we got a couple things in the chat here that we should probably get to too. But Yager557 said $3 million cap space that the Ducks now gained from trading Brandon Montour. That gives you a little bit more space to re-sign Silfverberg, which they are obviously trying to do, and they were trying to figure out some cap issues to get that signing official and done. So that gives them the possibility to get that done, which we know they likely are. It's been reported from both Eric Stevens and Josh Cooper, among other people, that the deal is pretty much set in place. It just has to be announced and made official. Yeah. And the one thing about this, too, is now the Ducks are seemingly in a spot where they are going to tank for the rest of the year, because, yes, Brendan Gurley is a great young player. He's only 21, but he's not going to come in and give you the same impact that Brandon Montour was giving you on a nightly basis and playing 23 minutes a night, right? Oh, he was playing more minutes than everybody except Hampus Lindholm. So that leaves a big hole, especially on the right side, where now it's going to be Manson, Walensky, and I guess Del Zotto playing on his offside for the rest of the year, which is far from ideal. So it kind of bolsters that spot. But one thing you brought up to me before we started the show about Brendan Gurley is the big thing on him is his skating. And you had something that you found from the All-Star game in the AHL that kind of tells you how good of a skater he really is.
Yeah, so he wasn't actually voted in for the AHL All-Star. There was someone else on his Rochester team, but he couldn't make it. I'm not quite sure why, whether he was injured or just didn't want to do it. But he ended up getting the call to go ahead and represent his team. He did 3 different competitions. One of them was the fastest skater, and I think he did the skate in like 13.6 seconds, which was the 6th fastest time in AHL history. So this is a guy who possesses that speed. He's kind of tallish. I mean, 6'2", that's kind of a normal size. He's 190, so he's a little lightweight, but he's got speed, he's got agility, so he's got the skating that you want out of today's defenseman. The only knock that he's got and things that he's been working on is his defensive side of things and his physicality. But those are kind of the same things that Montour would also kind of falter a little bit on. He wasn't the strongest there, but Montour had a better offensive upside. But at this point in the NHL, if you can create chances, and especially if you're fast, which is what we're trying to accomplish with all these moves, that gives you the opportunity to get more chances to maybe showcase your offensive abilities. He's never been able to get that. So he'll probably get that chance. And, like I said, it's just a guy with a ton of speed. So it'd be interesting to see how he does. Change the scenery type deal.
Yeah, and Chelshock brings up in our chat that he's slight in frame. And yeah, you kind of see that generally guys fresh out of junior, especially guys that are 6'2" and 190. He's going to be slight in frame, and he's got to build some muscle there, and we'll see that in time. I mean, you look at Cam Fowler coming out of junior too. He was pretty slight. He still is.
Lindholm was that way too.
Lindholm, yeah. Jacob Larson as well. He still kind of is. So that Brandon Montour to the same extent. There's not many guys who are Aaron Ekblads who come out of junior and are already basically men coming out of that league and are ready to step in and play. So give him a little bit of time. I mean, he'll fill out, probably be 6'2", 215 by the time he's fully established as an NHL defenseman, and that extra 10 to 15 pounds will help him a lot on the physicality and just the being able to be a little bit more effective in his own zone, just having a little bit more weight on his side. I'll read the Elite Prospects description of him because I think it pretty much sums up exactly what type of player you're going to get from him. So it says, Brendan Gooley's a heads-up defenseman who can really take a beating and dish it out as well. Built like a tank, grueling play doesn't faze him. Calm, collected, and poised with the puck. Great body and stick positioning without the puck. Reliable at both ends of the ice and can be trusted with a hefty amount of ice time. All in all, a defenseman who strives to be difficult to play against consistently with and without the puck. And I think that's exactly what you're going to get in this guy. He's got some offensive upside. It reminds me a bit of Cam Fowler in that sense, where people believed, the offensive side of the game was something he had locked down. It was just the defensive aspect that he had to work on, and a good two-way guy similar to what the Ducks had when they got Jacob Larson. So a lot of similarities in his game coming out of junior to some of the prospects the Ducks have had in the past. And really the last time I saw this guy play a lot was in the WHL, and he looked pretty good splitting time between Prince Albert and Prince George. So he has an impressive resume coming up, but it is slightly worrying. I know 21 isn't old by any standards, but he hasn't really been able to break in to the Sabres roster, playing 6 games in 2016-17 coming out of junior, 18 last year, and only 2 this year, and spending the majority of his professional career with Rochester. It's a bit worrying to see that he hasn't been able to make the jump, but I haven't watched him play, and that could specifically because the Buffalo Sabres haven't been that good, and they want to season him a bit, where a team that was competitive, at least recently, Rochester has been a good team in the AHL. So it'll be interesting to see, because he probably jumps right into this team, right? He probably gets a start tomorrow, I would assume.
Yeah, if he can make it over to Vancouver in enough time, I assume that he'll be able to get in that lineup, and I think they kind of want to. Right now, they just dropped Walensky down to the minors, and they brought up Holzer. So there's a chance Holzer is there just in case they can't work him into the lineup. Yeah. But I mean, this is a guy, once again, it's going to be a guy that Bob Murray probably wants to have a good look at for the next couple of games at least, kind of see where he's at, how he kind of works into the mold of this team, and kind of go from there. If not, he's done a great job. Obviously, he was back up to the All-Star in the AHL, so I mean, you're getting a good caliber defenseman should he have to go and play in the for the Gulls. So ideally, we want him up. You don't want to lose a defenseman and not bring in anybody, especially someone that eats as many minutes as him, as Montour did. So he should get the chance, and we'll have a better idea watching him play over hopefully the next couple of games, and kind of seeing what we got in him and see if there's potential. Because a lot of times you can read things, and like a lot of times they'll have a negative outlook, and it's just because they see other players on their team, and they think, well, he's not stacking up to that. He's not really that good. And then he goes on another team, and it's exactly what that team needs. So he's a little bit younger. This is, once again, what everyone was clamoring about. Got mad that Silverberg got resigned, Ed. And then, so we're supposed to go younger.
I'm not the only one.
I know, there's a lot of people. So, I mean, this is a slightly younger, but I think it's more of a tactical thing as far as freeing up. salary, also the protection aspect, and you're getting a good skating guy who hasn't really gotten a chance. He's only done 23 games over 3 seasons with Buffalo.
Yeah.
He just hasn't really been given that much of an opportunity, and sometimes those guys kind of pay off in the end. And I'll leave it to Duck scouting.
Theodore, right?
Yeah. And that's the other thing. We've lost a lot of that young. And that's probably another thing why people are a little upset that Montour's gone, because in the last few seasons, Theodore's gone, Vatanen's gone, Montour is now gone, and everyone's like, we used to have this, of the envy of minor league defensemen coming up, and now we got nothing. So, Montour gone, we get another one, and get a first-round draft pick. Who knows who that could end up being?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Brendan Gooley, obviously, because he's going to be the new face Ducks are seeing. But we got to talk about Brandon Montour, obviously, and what kind of hole this is going to leave in the Ducks roster. Because now on the right side of regulars, they only have Josh Manson, and with Andy Welinski getting sent down, at least for the short term, for him to be eligible for the playoffs for the Gulls, it's going to be Manson and Holzer. Dodgen is still down there, so is Schuster. I believe both of them are still down there. So those are right-handed options if you want to bring them back up. And you also have Del Zotto, who's played on the off wing this year and is offside, and so has Jakob Larsson if you really wanted to go down that risk. But it leaves a massive hole on that right side, and it has been a down year for Brandon Montour. He hasn't been as effective, but a lot of guys haven't. And the one area where he's succeeded a lot in this year has been zone entries, which has been a problem for the Ducks for a long time, but he's top 5 in the league at the position. All season he's been at zone entries, offensive zone entries. So it's really never been offense that's been the problem for Brandon Montour. He's always excelled on the Ducks in that sense, but I think it's defense. And I think Bob Murray to this point has gotten a little bit fed up with Brandon Montour just really not developing his defensive side of the game fast enough, and I think that's why we've seen him moved on and not a guy like Josh Manson, because Josh Manson brings something to this lineup. We've always said it, that nobody else really does at this point, and nobody else really can. And the Ducks have a lot of good skating defensemen that can transition the puck out of their own zone. Cam Fowler has been one of the best at that every season but this year, and Hampus Lindholm is top 5 in the league in zone exits this year. So the Ducks have a lot of quick defensemen who can get the puck up the ice, and I think making this move, as much as it's tough to move on from Brandon Montour, and it leaves
because he's so pretty.
I know, right? It's a tough move. I mean, everybody loves Brandon Montour, and he is a valuable defenseman, and the uncertainty aspect of what you're getting in Brendan Gooley in the first round pick hurt, but it is a hole the Ducks are going to have to either address in free agency tomorrow or in the draft to bring in some guys on the blue line to eventually shore up the right-handed side of defense.
Yeah, I think with the emerging chemistry between Del Zotto, even though on his off wing with Fowler, those guys, it's really hard to ever find anyone that plays and reads well with Cam Fowler. It's almost like the Getzlaf thing. You have Getzlaf and Perry. You couldn't seem to find a winger or someone to make it all work. It's kind of that way with Fowler a little bit. So Del Zotto and him have looked good. I think the change, it's weird. It's 2 different seasons for the Ducks. It's the Randy Carlyle, and then since then, and what I've seen since then, I've been very impressed on defense. Pretty much everybody. I was still impressed with Montour. But I think, like I said, this is more of a tactical trade than they were so upset with how Montour plays defensively that, we got to get rid of this guy and, bring in somebody else. They are going to miss that creativity, that speed, that willingness to create offense. That's going to be missed. I don't think he was ever utilized properly on the power play as well. And that was something that I'd always at one point hoped to kind of see him, on that little half board a la Ovechkin, in that area and just unload, shots, but they never really got that opportunity under our Carlisle. And so kind of sad to see that one go. But I think your top 4, at least for the rest of this season, is pretty shored up. I think Del Zotto and Fowler seem to be working well together. You're talking about zone exits. Fowler has done much better over the last few games since the call-up. He's making great long outlet passes. Like I said, for whatever reason, him and Del Zotto seem to be working just fine. And then you have Manson and Lindholm back together. That's a solid top 4 again. That I'm happy with. And then, Montour wasn't really kind of clicking so much with Magna. They were having their problems, especially in Calgary.
Yeah. The writing was on the wall for him, right? He I think under Murray, he dropped down 4 minutes in ice time and didn't really see that get jumped back up over the 5 games that Murray's been in charge now, or maybe it's more. I don't even know at this point. But his minutes dropped down, and it kind of just felt like he was the odd man out for Bob Murray.
Yeah, and still very valuable enough to get a first round and a prospect. So, it seemed like the best thing to do. If you got to move one of the guys so that you can protect the other 3, and a right-handed shot's always valued, especially at the trade deadline. Everyone's looking for the right-handed, defenseman, so you can provide offense. So they got a lot for it. Like I said, it would have been great if it would have been Buffalo's first pick, but it is what it is. So I'm, like I said, more of a tactical trade.
Yeah, and I think that shows you how much Bob Murray and his scouting staff values Brendan Gooley and thinks what type of player he's going to turn out to be. I don't think this rules out other moves, though, from that blue line. Yeah, we talked about Lindholm, Fowler, and Manson being the guys that now you can protect them. You don't have to worry about losing anybody on that blue line. But I don't think it necessarily means everybody's safe. I think with putting Lindholm and Manson together and the fact that Manson is the one who survived this trade and Montour is the guy who ends up getting moved out, means that Bob Murray is pretty happy with Lindholm and Manson being back together, which I'm more than excited about.
Yes.
I think they need to be together because of how successful they were. But the other guy, the odd man out here, is Cam Fowler. I don't think that necessarily puts aside the fact that he could be traded. I don't think it would be now, but at the draft, I think there's a very real possibility that if the Ducks get a good offer for him, that they consider moving on. Because you look at the left side now, it comes down to Lindholm, Fowler, Larson, Mahura in the minors, and Brendan Gooley. You've got some very good young defensemen that you're eventually going to have to make room for, because Gooley, like we said, is 21, and he'll likely be close to being ready, if not next year, the year after. And the same goes for Josh Mahura. And I don't know how many more chances Jakob Larsson's going to get, but the Ducks obviously still think he eventually has a future with this team on the left side of defense. So there's something that has to be done eventually. It doesn't have to be done now. You're not in any rush to make this move now. But at the draft, I think you have to address it. Whether it's, I don't think you're obviously not going to move Gooley. You just brought him in. I don't think you're going to move Josh Mahura. So for me, it comes down to Cam Fowler or Jakob Larsson and on who you're going to move out. So Larsson's the easy one. It's a little bit easier to move him probably because there's less working parts, not as big of a contract, not as much term, not as much money involved. The likely return in assets is going to be similar to what they got from Marcus Pettersson, maybe just a little bit more because of the age of Jakob Larsson. But Fowler is a guy I don't think is off the table with this Montour deal taking place.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the potential for a big trade because, I mean, Fowler's name still carries a ton of weight, even though he's having an off season. He is that skating guy, and, he this season can't find any offense. And because of his skating ability, his defensive deficiencies get overlooked. So there's still a lot of high opinions about Fowler throughout the league and what he can provide a team. And now you have 2 first-round picks. I mean, if you want like an upper echelon a right D guy, you got 2 first rounds and a Cam Fowler. If you want to look for a blockbuster trade, that's generally not Bob Murray style, but it's an interesting thought. And even if you don't want to get rid of Fowler and you can find like you said, a Larson and a first round pick or something for a really decent right defenseman, then things start looking a lot better as far as the defensive core of this team moving forward.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to a question that Chelchuk had in the chat. He said, since Bob Murray said there'd be no big moves till the offseason, and of course that did turn out to be true, do you see a second big move before the deadline tomorrow?
There's a possibility. There was hockey at noon, and they had Brian Burke on there, and one of the things he said, or one of the questions was asked, is like, when you go into the trade deadline, either buyer or seller, do you have, a grocery list? And he said, absolutely 100%. You have it about a month before that trade deadline comes around. Yeah. Ideally, who you'd like to pick up, but you have to be real with yourself and figure out where your deficiencies are, and then look at who can possibly fill those deficiencies. So this is all something that he can easily have a shopping list, and though he may not be looking to do a whole lot as far as adding pieces, he knows where he's got to position himself for either right now, if teams get desperate enough to give them, enough draft picks and anything else that once we get to draft day, and that's where he likes to make those trades, that's where you're going to see, he'll He'll trade now, not for players necessarily, I don't think, or big name players, but to acquire as many draft picks or prospects that he can possibly go ahead and flip come the off season. So it's stuff now for later. I guess is the best way to describe it.
The Ducks are clearly sellers with this trade. We knew they would be, but the news of re-signing Silfverberg kind of went against that. But yeah, it definitely goes in tomorrow. And you look, I don't think Cam Fowler is going to be traded tomorrow. I don't think that is likely. The only big trade I can see happening is Adam Henrique's name is still out there. And I think Bob Murray would have to get a deal he's really comfortable with and something that not necessarily blows him away, but that makes sense. And we've heard that from Bob Murray all the time. He only really makes deals if they make sense to the team short term and long term. And, with Sam Steele coming up and Ryan Getzlaf isn't out forever, and you still got Derek Grant, there is room for Adam Henrique to get moved out at this point and keep Sam Steele up for the rest of the year, because that seems to be the likely option if they can't compete in the playoffs for the goals, that maybe you go that route and you make the big trade and move Adam Henrique. There will be teams who will come after him despite the contract, because it's not a horrible deal. And if you maybe bring some salary in return, or the Ducks retain, I don't think they'll want to for that long, but if you retain, 15 to 20% of that deal, that could make it a bit more attractive to teams and possibly net you more in return. But, Duchesne's off the board, and the amount of centers available, there's not a ton of centers available. And you have, a winger like Matt Zuccarello, who's now off the board, and unfortunately for Dallas, got hurt in his first game today. He started off so well, put up 2 points, and then now he's out for 4 weeks. But there will be teams that are looking for a player like Adam Henrique. So I would say if any big deal gets done at the deadline tomorrow, as for the Ducks, I think it would be Adam Henrique.
Henrique's a definite candidate for it. I would also say Sprong, just because at this point he's just been a healthy scratch and not being utilized. I mean, I don't know why, given all the injuries, they keep calling up, Gibbons, and I understand Sam Steele being center, but I mean, you're calling up other guys to play, and you got Sprong sitting there, and it's like, oh, are you going to play him? You don't like him? You don't like what he does? So, I mean, that's another possibility. He's not necessarily an impact player, and usually at the trade deadline, they're looking for impact players that are really going to kind of move the needle for whatever team it is looking for it. I don't think Sprong necessarily qualifies on most people's radar as an impact player as Henrique would. So it might be a move that happens, but Henrique would be the biggest impact player teams would probably be asking about. It just depends, once again, if the offer is right, because at this point, I think they probably want to keep Henrique, just given we don't know how Kessler's going to be moving forward. He's a fourth-line center now.
And again, it's a deal that doesn't have to be made, but if any deal gets made tomorrow, I think it's Adam Henrique that gets done. I hope something happens tomorrow, because we're gonna be
you
live.
hate everyone on the Ducks. You don't
no, well, I mean, in the sense that we're gonna be live for a few hours tomorrow, so hopefully
we have something to talk about.
even if it's just Daniel Sprong, which seems, if you want to pick the most likely move at this point, it probably is Daniel Sprong getting traded tomorrow. I know he does have a year in his deal, so you don't have to. But, I just think Daniel Sprong at this point, being scratched 4 games in a row. Somebody in the chat mentioned they did the same thing with Pontus Aberg as well. And if you can trade him, get a third-round pick, Bob Murray will probably go out and get an AHL guy for him, because that's the type of deal he usually ends up making for some good young offensive talent. But the Ducks just don't seem to like what he brings on the defensive side. So if you go out and get a third or fourth round pick, I know it's not a lot, but it adds to the cupboard for the draft this year. And the Ducks have done a good job drafting in both the third and the fourth round in the past. And I have full confidence in the scouting staff to get something done with that pick that could eventually possibly turn into something better than Daniel Sprong, and will be available for you when you're looking to contend again in the next few years. So I think that's the likely route we go. But you look at this now, with Brandon Montour being moved and Jakob Silfverberg being re-signed, they kind of contrast the direction the Ducks want to go in a bit. At least that's the way I feel, is you've signed Jakob Silfverberg at 28 for 5 years until he's 33. And then you've moved out Brandon Montour in an effort to, as Bob Murray quoted, I think the Ducks released a statement where he said to retool. That's what they're doing, is retooling. So it's a little bit weird to me when you go out and you sign a guy at 28 for 5 years, and then you also, a couple days later, say that now we're retooling and trading a 24-year-old defenseman, bringing in a draft pick and a 21-year-old defenseman. It's a little bit contrasting, I think, a direction that Bob Murray's throwing out here.
Well, and I've said this with you. You can't compete with a bunch of just 20-year-old or 22-year-olds, and you're going to need some of those veteran guys. The Adam Henriques, the Getzlofs, the Silverbergs. So you're going to have some of that experience on there. And so I don't hate the Silverberg signing. I don't think, he's just a little over $5 million once it's finalized. Seems like it'd be just over $5 million. Yeah, for 5 years. But at this point, I think he's going to be better suited to play the new Duck style. It already kind of showed in the fact that he's scored quite, a handful of times. I think 4 times there in like 4 games. Last 2 games have been a little rough for everyone just because they're playing Calgary, and back-to-back they had to play Edmonton. But I like this style. It's going to open up offense, and for a guy like Silverberg, he doesn't have as much defensive responsibility now that he's no longer part of a shutdown line necessarily. Yeah. And if the Ducks continue to play this way, I can see him being a 25 to 30 goal scorer. Now you have, in my opinion, 25 to 30 goal scorer. This guy's done 16 in this horrible 2 seasons, and he's been injured for a little bit of it. I don't think it's out of the realm that he has 10 more goals under a different structure, if not more. So I don't find that bad, especially if it's good for the next, 2, 3, 4 years. And I think you would like someone who can score 25 to 30 goals in the next 3, 4 years when that retool is kind of complete and everyone's there. You don't want to have a rebuild, so retool. You're going to have pieces in place as you bring in the newer, younger pieces as well. Montour, like we said, I think kind of fell into that. He just kind of dropped in what the Ducks were going to utilize with him. I think they didn't use him well enough, so that's kind of their own fault. But I think they're trying to create something that they're not going to be in trouble come that expansion draft, and someone was going to have to go at some point, and it kind of made sense that it would be Montour at this point because he's on the third line, and And that's almost something you'd even want Montour to have the opportunity to go play somewhere else and really kind of excel if you can. You always kind of go crap if they do because then you kind of look bad in the trade. But at the same time, what are you going to do? This kid's 24. He's got a wealth of talent offensively, and you don't want to hold him back just because he can't really crack the top 4 because he can't play really well with Cam Fowler. So.
Yeah, I agree with you about needing veteran guys around when you're doing a retool and having a lot of young guys come into the lineup. You can't just play all kids. I completely agree with that. The problem I have with it is, we've been waiting a long time for Jakob Silfverberg to be a 30-goal scorer. And it seems like we're at that point where he's probably not going to get to that point, and maybe he will in one good season because I think he has the potential to do that in a very good year for him. But I don't think, he's a consistent 20-goal guy for sure, which is nothing wrong with that. That's a very valuable piece to have. The problem is you're bad now, and you've re-signed him at this point. I would rather trade him, get some assets for this year, maybe attempt re-signing him in the offseason, which I know isn't an easy thing to pull off when you've just traded a guy. And the other team is going to get the first right of refusal to go and talk to him and try and re-sign him. But there are other veteran players that you can find cheaper in free agency that you can bring in to kind of move this team in another direction. It doesn't necessarily have to be Jakob Silfverberg at 5.25 for 5 years, where you've locked up some hefty salary in that point. And again, I know the Ducks don't have any big name contracts they have to sign leading up until that point, so it really doesn't handcuff them too much. And especially if you do move Adam Henrique at some point anyway, then you free up a lot of salary in that sense. So I understand the reasons why they signed him, and I get where you're coming from with it. But when you're going into a retool and then also signing a guy who's going to be 33 at the end of this deal, it just, there are 2 different directions you're trying to move in at the same time. And you could easily go get a veteran piece in free agency rather than keeping Jakob Silfverberg. And I love Silfverberg, and I think he's a valuable piece to a competitive organization.
Funny way of showing it.
He's a valuable piece to a competitive organization, but the Ducks aren't going to be competitive, and you could fill that spot with somebody who costs a hell of a lot less on a shorter term until you are ready to be competitive again.
Yeah, one of the biggest things, or our biggest difference between me and you, Ed, is you think they're 2 to 3 seasons away from being competitive again, and I don't see that. I think Carlisle gone is a huge step in the right direction, more so than most people probably realize. The Ducks are playing the way I expected them to play at the start of the season, and we never saw it until Carlisle left. And now they're actually playing the way I expect them to, And I'm way more optimistic that it was Carlisle. That was the piece that was kind of holding or gumming up the works. And that's a really old saying. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah. Well, without Brandon
anywho,
Montour, you think they can be competitive in next year, the year after?
Yeah, because I haven't been too disappointed with any of the defensive lines and or any of the offensive lines. The structure they have now on defense, it's zone instead of man-to-man staggered defense. That brings everyone back in. They're willing to let those outside shots against goalies like Ryan Miller and John Gibson, and that's going to be far easier for them to stop. You don't have to be super stellar. And it seems like the forwards, when they're in that zone and then there's a breakout, they're moving with speed. And now you don't necessarily have to have Montour, being that exit guy, the guy who needs to have the puck. He can pass it out to the forwards that are flying. And I'm even seeing Josh Manson leading rushes at this point. If Josh Manson is leading rushes, I'm kind of confident that the style of play for most of the Ducks defensemen, you can still be good. Cam Fowler's looked way better. Lindholm is Lindholm. He'll always be good. Yeah. But even Manson's looking good. Del Zotto doesn't look bad. I didn't think I'd be saying that when we got him. And like I said, Montour is good. He's got good offensive upsides. The Ducks had an opportunity to move him, get some assets. And like I said, I think the style of play, they'll be able to have less skilled defensemen on the offensive side. What I mean by the skill is just less offensively skilled, and still be able to contribute, because I think those guys are now going to be, I just watched them pinch in. There's forward support if they do pinch in, and it's all about keeping the puck in the zone and creating multiple chances. And I don't think you necessarily have to have a Montour out there every single time to get those chances. I think the Ducks are going to have a lot more chances, which we haven't seen really at all this season until the change. So I think they can still be competitive for sure, because I've already seen them be more competitive than they had all season. Even in their losses, I feel like at any point we were right there. We could have done that. It was one or two things against, Calgary's the top team in the West, second best offense. We held them to 2 goals. One was deflected off of Megna. The other one was a 2-on-1 that Megna ended up putting right back. So it's kind of like small little things. But for a team that's been god awful the entire season, I'm seeing a lot better things. So I'm far more optimistic that this is just a blip of a season, and you'll see a better Ducks team next season. And that's why I don't mind re-signing Silverberg now for the term and for the money, because I think he can still be a valuable part on this team, and this team can compete next year. They're not waiting 2 or 3 years to become competitive all over again.
Yeah, the thing I have with that is I don't think Del Zotto's your answer at a number 4. He's not a number 4 on a competitive team. So you would have to go out then and get somebody, or hope that Jacob Larson can be your number 4 on the offside, or hope that maybe Josh Mahura next year, or even Brendan Gooley can be an offside number 4 for you. I don't know if that's the best option, and the Ducks could maybe look at to free agency to sum that up if they think they're going to be competitive. But you need now to fill that hole on the right side if you're going to be competitive, like you said, in next year or the year after. And then the other problem I have is up front. The Ducks this year, because of Randy Carlo to some extent, and because they just don't have a lot of talent up front, just haven't been able to score goals. And the thing is, I even in a good year, I don't see where they're going to get too many more goals from. Silverberg's had an average year for him. He's going to finish around 20, 25 goals. That's an average year. So you're not looking at more goals from Silverberg next year. He's not going to all of a sudden become a 30 or 40 goal scorer. Corey Perry, over a season stretch, probably doing, if he did this over the entire year, would be at the same pace he normally is, about 15 to 20 goals. And that's what you're likely going to get from him. The only guy who's had a down year, goal scoring wise, really has been Rickard Rakell. So if you add, 15 goals to this team right now, they're still bottom half of the league, probably bottom 25, bottom 6 in the league in goals for. And they haven't added anything else to that mix, and there's no guys, if Max Jones would have to come up next year and score 20, Troy Terry would probably have to score 20, Sam Steele would have to be around, 15 next year for this team to take another step forward. Maxime Comtois would have to come in and probably be a 20-goal scorer. Patrick Eaves isn't going to be that guy anymore, and he's likely not going to even probably be part of this team next year. We know Ryan Kessler isn't going to score goals. He went 38 games without scoring a goal, so that's not going to happen.
He was due.
And if you
ketchup bottle, man, ketchup bottle.
Yeah, and if you have Adam Henrique, he's doing exactly what he normally does, goal scoring wise. He's going to usually get around 20 goals. So there's not a lot of increase in offense next year, that unless they go out and get a guy in free agency. That makes me think that this team, I think they'll be better. I think they will play better without Randy Carlo. They'll probably play better under a new coach. But I don't see where all this offense is going to come from that's going to make them better. John Gibson in net is going to be key for them. If they have a better defensive structure in front of them, they could be like the Islanders, maybe one of the better defensive teams in the league. We'll have to see. It all depends on who comes in and what system they establish and what defensemen they have in front of them. But goal scoring is still going to be an issue from this team, and I don't think you can be competitive having a bottom half offense in this league. So we'll have to see. I don't know. We got a couple questions in chat we might as well get to because we've ignored them a little bit. But
it's our podcast. We can do whatever we want.
Exactly. Yeah. Yager557 said, when we tank for the rest of the season, will Gibby play another game, or will he get some time to rest after carrying the team on his shoulders?
I mean, there's not a lot of upside of playing him, especially if he's battling through something. I mean, all intents and purposes, it seems like a concussion. They're not going to come out and say it until they know for sure he's not going to come back out. So at this point, there's still the opportunity for him to still play. Concussions are tricky. I haven't heard of him skating yet, so I mean he's got to at least start to skate before he takes shots, and then even after that, it's going to take a little while for get shots and make sure that he's symptom free for a while. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, and we're talking about maybe a month or so left in the season. So if he's not 100% and 100% for quite a few days, I don't see a real need to rush him back. And Miller's doing fine. If he's not traded, there's another piece that could possibly be traded. But Boyle seems to be completely adequate to do the job right now, and also to really kind of get his evaluation on it to kind of see where he stands and try and impress the GM as well. So, if Ryan Miller's gone and Chad Johnson doesn't come back from injury either, then they're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel at that point. Yeah. But there's no need if he's injured. So as long as he's healthy and get some games in here and there, don't necessarily shelf him just because you want to tank. I don't think Bob Murray would do that, and I don't think John Gibson wants to sit around if he can play. No player wants to do that. Just depends on how that concussion goes.
Yeah, if he can play, he'll play.
Yeah.
He's not a guy, like you said, who's going to want to sit on the bench and not play because his team's wants to tank or whatever.
Yeah, that doesn't sit well with players.
No, if he's 100%, he's going to play. The real thing I think plays into it is if Ryan Miller is traded tomorrow, it's because either John Gibson or Chad Johnson are ready to come off the IR, or the Ducks are looking to acquire another rental goalie or whatever just to fill the spot that Ryan Miller has. And I think at this point, the only reason Ryan Miller would be traded is if he said, hey, I'm going to come back next year. I'm going to re-sign with this team, but I want to go and have one last shot at a cup. So if there's a contender like San Jose or whoever, or St. Louis even, but I doubt they will at this point. If there's a contender out there who's interested in me, I'd like to get traded to them, have a shot at a cup. If not, I'm going to come back anyway. And I think the Ducks would only do that either, one, if he asks and says, hey, can you do this for me? Or if the Ducks have Chad Johnson or John Gibson ready to come back, because they need two goalies tomorrow. They have a game tomorrow, too. So if Chad Johnson and John Gibson are nowhere close to coming back, Ryan Miller is likely a Duck for the rest of the season, which, I'm fine with. He's going to get you a third-round pick at most, and I think if you could get that and have another guy come in and let the guy get a shot at a cup, then that's fine. But if the Ducks go through the entire day tomorrow and don't trade him, I'm not going to be upset.
Yeah, nor surprised. Also, he played that game in Calgary and seemed to kind of wince a little bit on one play with his knee, and then he didn't play in the Edmonton game. It didn't look like it affected him too terribly much. I mean, he stayed in the Calgary game and didn't really look out of place. And it was back-to-back, so I'm not surprised he didn't even play in the Edmonton one. But that's also got to give you concern because he's coming back from injury. It's that knee, and it was kind of an awkward thing. So teams might be a little sketchy. And, if they get him, it's going to be he's a backup. So you're not going to get a whole lot. Teams aren't willing to give up a whole lot. He's more of an insurance for any team that does pick him up. Yeah. And for insurance, you're not going to get a second or first round pick or anything like that. So, third round is best, but once again, the Ducks have to have goalies. So someone's got to be there. And if the other two aren't ready, then you just have to just keep them. I mean, either way. My phone fell. At least I gave out a manly shriek.
Just you might as well keep him if you don't have to move him at least. Chelshock said, "How many top 9 spots do we actually have after the season for the kids to slot into?" This is assuming the Ducks don't trade anybody tomorrow. You've got and no buyouts or no guys on long-term injured reserve. So this is just assuming a lot of things. But the Ducks will have Corey Perry, Ryan Getzlaf, Adam Henrique, Ricard Raquel, Jakob Silfverberg, Nick Ritchie, all as if you want to say top 6 guys. Then you still have Derek Grant if you re-sign him. So let's just assume they don't. And then Ryan Kessler if you want to include him in top 9 as well. You've got about 2 top 9 spots, and then Andre Kasha has to jump in there as well. So if Ryan Kessler is still a top 9 guy for you next year, it all depends on who they decide to play over him. He's been playing 4th line, but that's a lot of money to put on your 4th line. There's about 1 or 2 top 9 spots for the Young Ducks next year, whether that's Max Jones or Troy Terry or Comtois, Lindstrom or Sam Steele. There's a lot of guys that have potential to make this team next year. There still aren't a lot of spots, and there's not a lot of guys you could move. And whether Patrick Eaves is back with this team next year or not, whether Ryan Kessler is a part of this team, same goes for Adam Henrique. There's a lot of possibility to move. Devin Shore will be back likely next year as well, and he could be a guy that's in your top 9 or on your 4th line. So Carter Rowney will be back, but he'll be on your 4th line. So there's not a lot of room for these young guys to step in next year, unfortunately, which kind of makes you wonder if a move for a guy like Adam Henrique or somebody else will be done either tomorrow or at the deadline. That all depends on how ready Bob Murray thinks that these young guys are, and he's trying to get a look at them by bringing all 3 of them up, or at least the 3 that he can bring up. He's bringing up into the lineup, and meanwhile, Maxime Comtois has 3 hat tricks in his last 6 games and in the QMJHL, and is putting up 2 points per game over I think 18 games right now. So you've got him producing at a high level down there, and you've got Lindstrom playing in Sweden against men. So there's a good chance that all 5 of these guys could be ready next year, but there could only be 2 or 3 spots for them.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about who's in the top 9 now, I mean, I honestly put Kessler as the 4th line guy, and I don't care if he has to be paid that much to be on the 4th line. It's produced, and what have you done for me now? I mean, it sucks that contract signed, and he's got a horrible injury that's makes him shelve him former self. He's good. He's a specialist now. He's a face-off guy, still an agitator. His play has been a lot better and chippier the last few games since Bob Murray's come over. But if you kind of count him out of that, like you said, the top line is probably solidified come next year, and that's Raquel, Perry, Getzlaf. That one's probably not moving much. I don't see much of a reason to mess with Uncle Rico and the kids, but that's another top 2nd or 3rd line. And then you'll have Silverberg on a line with Kasha, and then like you said, you can have a Sam Steele in there. But then you got to find room for Comtois, because I would hate to have him on the 3rd or on the 4th line, kind of wasting some of that talent there. They might move things around. It may not be Jones and Terry show next season. They might plug them in here or there. So there's probably 1 or 2 spots, like you said, in that top 9. But I also think that's counting Terry and Jones already taking up 2 spots. So I would say there's 4 available with about 5 guys, young kids that can come in. That's
without Jones and Terry. There's only a couple spots because you've got a lot of guys who are going to be there no matter what. And then you could play guys on 4th. And like I said, you could play Kessler on the 4th line, which does open another spot in the top 9. But you also have to remember that there is a potential the Ducks could get a top 2 pick in this draft. And if you get Capo Caco or Jack Hughes, which I know it's not a guarantee, but there's a possibility the Ducks could get them. You're assuming that they're also going to play next year as well. If you get them, Jack Hughes will likely at least get a shot at playing in the NHL, and he should be ready to go just based on his skill level. And Capo Caco has been producing against men in the top league in Finland this year, so he'd be likely to go and be a starter.
Jump in.
Yeah, in this league next year as well. So if you did get one of those guys, then you now have 6 young guys that have to get into the lineup, and you would assume your 1st or 2nd overall pick would be above those guys to get into the lineup, right? So, and if you're Jack Hughes at center, then that you see probably Sam Steele gets starting in the AHL, and same goes for Isaac Lindstrom as well. So It'll be interesting.
It's a good problem to have, really.
Yeah, it's not a bad problem to have at all.
bad.
Yeah, to have too many good young players to put in the lineup, that's not a bad problem to have, and it gives you
especially forwards where we've never really had a plethora of guys that we want to see.
Andre Cash is still young too, and he'll hopefully be healthy come next year as well. And you've got 5 or 6, maybe even 7 good young players to inject into this lineup. And if you can't fit them all, you play them in San Diego. You maybe make some moves eventually. And one of the reasons why I think maybe not this year or even next year, but eventually Adam Henrique probably gets moved, just because 5 years from now, these guys are going to be. You can't keep them in the minors that long. You can't keep any of these guys in the minors for 5 years. So eventually you're going to have to start making room. And I know Perry's contract comes off the books at some point, and so does Ryan Kessler's and obviously Ryan Getzlaf, but we assume at least Getzlaf will be back. And there will be other contracts that do come off the books. But now you've got Silfverberg and Henrique for the next 5 years. And you've got Getzlaf for, the next 3 with Perry, and Kessler for the next 4. So you're running into a spot where you can't really take these guys out of the lineup, and you need to make room for some of these young kids. So it does. Jam. Yeah, it's a logjam, not only on the left side of defense, but on forward. And again, it's not a bad problem to have, but eventually you have to make some room to get these kids into the lineup.
Or you trade them.
You trade them, or you trade them if you think you're going to be competitive. You maybe trade them, like you said, for a right-handed defenseman if you want to go that route. I don't think the Ducks should yet, because we don't know what or who these players are going to turn into. We have no idea what their production is going to be like. Obviously, it's been nice to see Jones and Terry play well, but the points haven't been put on the board yet for them. Sam Steele has played well lately in San Diego, and he looked pretty good in the small sample size we've seen from him this year. And they're still very young. I mean, these guys are just 20 and 21. Yeah, so you want to.
I consider this season just a wash. It was doomed from the start, and I really don't want to hold too many people accountable for what happened this season as a continuation for the upcoming seasons. Can't wait to see what the young guys do. That speed, the new style we're going to play, I think will benefit everybody. And that's why I'm kind of, I'm anxious to see who's going to do it. But they'll have to fight over spots, and that's fine. Healthy competition. Let's see who's the best person. If you're not putting up goals, then someone else is right there willing to take your job if you can't do it. So that's all good news for Ducks.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what they do, because there's a lot of now moving parts we didn't expect, with the possibility of Jones, Terry, and Steele not having to spend the rest of the year with the Ducks, but not being able to be eligible for the San Diego Gulls in the playoffs. It kind of throws an interesting mix into the rest of the season for Anaheim. But we'll be here tomorrow with the trade deadline show, if you want to call it that. We're going to be live at some point tomorrow, one of these 2 times, either noon or 9 a.m. Pacific, we'll go live, or we'll do 10 a.m. Pacific or 1 p.m. Eastern, depending on, because I don't think we want to be on here for 4 hours. So
no, my phone would not handle that.
Yeah, so a couple hours where we can at least cover the end of trade deadline, and at least a half an hour to an hour after it ends to get some of the trades that trickle in. So. We'll be
Most of this stuff doesn't happen until like the first hour and the leading up to it, and then the last hour.
Like recently, it's been what we've seen over the last few days, where the big trades are getting done. Duchesne is done. Zuccarello is done. Montour out of nowhere is done. I still think there's a lot of moves to be had. I mean, Mark Stone is still available out there for some teams. Wayne Simmons, the Flyers had almost a farewell to him in their locker room because they think that he's going to be gone. And there's Ristolainen recently. This after the Montour trade has been rumored that there's going to be teams interested in him. So there's a lot of names coming up that aren't just unrestricted free agents that could go tomorrow. So obviously we'll be focusing on the Ducks, but any big trades that happen tomorrow will be more of just a trade deadline show, in the sense that we're going to be talking about any big trades, because we can't just sit here and wait for the Ducks to do something and ignore some of the big trades that are going to be going on among other teams. So we'll keep you guys posted for that. Just make sure you either follow us on Twitch to know when we're going to go live, because we'll be going live on here, or just check our social media on Twitter or Facebook. We'll tweet out when we're going to go live a little bit ahead of time, so you get an idea of what we're going to be doing.
Yep.
All right, guys. Well, we also have the post-game show tomorrow too. So if you're not already sick of us from now, and for the live show tomorrow, we will do a post-game show, which is also going to be live after the game against Vancouver tomorrow. So make sure you check that out as well. And that one will probably be on YouTube. So I know we're kind of spread out across a bunch of different platforms, which we're trying to work out right now. But the deadline show will be here on Twitch. and the post-game show will be on YouTube, and you can check out any of these shows on iTunes and Spreaker as well, where the audio version is. But thanks everybody for coming out, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye, guys.